Okay, it looks like 5:01 on my watch, so I'll go ahead and get us started. Welcome, everyone. Welcome to the 2023 South Asia Book Award Meet the Author webinar series. Today is our third and final webinar in a three-part series featuring the award-winning books for the 2023 South Asia Book Awards in the young adult, middle grade, and young reader categories. My name is Essie Lenchner, and I'm the Assistant Director at the Institute for Regional and International Studies National Resource Center, otherwise known as IRIS-NRC. I serve as the administrator of the book award along with my colleague, Andrea Fowler, the Assistant Director of the Center for South Asia at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. The South Asia Book Award, supported by the South Asia National Outreach Consortium, is given annually for up to 3 outstanding works of literature which accurately and skillfully portray the experience of individuals living in South Asia or of South Asians living in other parts of the world. A complete list of all recognized titles going back to our first award year in 2010 is available on our website, southasiabookaward.wisc.edu. Today's webinar will include approximately 30 minutes of author and illustrator presentations, followed by a Q&A. Please note that since we're using a webinar for today's event, the chat is disabled. Please add your questions and comments in the Q&A throughout today's event. After the presentation, we'll get to as many of your questions as we can. And so it's my pleasure to welcome the 2023 South Asia Book Award winner in the young reader category, author Shireen Shamsi and illustrator Tarun Lak. Shireen Shamsi's family left India during the partition. Having lived in 3 continents, she views herself as a global citizen and now spends time sharing stories with children of the world. Shireen and her husband have raised 6 children, 3 human and 3 feline, and reside in the suburbs of Chicago. Shireen will go first, but I'll go ahead and share Tarun's little bio as well. Tarun Lak is an Indian-American animator and illustrator, born in Miami, Florida, and raised in Chennai, India. He attended Ringling College of Art and Design to study computer animation. He has since worked as a character animator on commercials and feature films, including Spider-Man, Into the Spider-Verse, Soul, and Luca. Tarun currently resides in the San Francisco Bay Area and enjoys drinking coffee and making art in his spare time. The Moon from Dehradun is his first picture book. So thank you both so much for joining us here today. I'm going to mute myself and welcome Shireen to share her story with us.
Thank you so much, Essie. I'm so honored, thrilled, and so very grateful for this award. Thank you and Andrea. And thank you to the Center of the South Asia Institute for Regional and International Studies, the National Resource Center at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. This book would not have come into existence without my wonderful agent, Abba of Talcott Notch Literary, and also my amazing editor, Eliza Liu, and the entire team at Athenaeum, Books for Young Readers. Thank you all for believing in this story. And thank you, Tarun. We're meeting today for the first time, and I'm so grateful to you for bringing my words to life and adding so much emotion and depth to the illustrations. And I really am so happy that you were gracious enough to ask me for photographs of my family and specific questions that you used in the illustrations. I really appreciate that. I also want to thank my critique groups and my writing community. I also would be remiss if I didn't mention my brother Ibrahim, who I turn to every time my editor sent me a request for edits. My gratitude to you is unquantifiable. It really takes a village to create a book, and I'm grateful for all your help and support. And also to my mother, whose story this is, and to whom this book is dedicated, who nourished us with stories we did not see in books. And to the memory of my father, whose words continue to inspire and uplift me. Last but not least, I thank my children. I am a writer because of them, and they inspire me every day. And my husband, who is my biggest support, who believes in me when I waver, and believe me, that happens a lot. Talha, you are my constant. You are my anchor, my life. There's an African proverb, until the lion tells the story, the hunter will always be the hero. Representation in stories is crucial. It's why I began writing stories for my children. I wanted them to see themselves. I wanted them to be validated and empowered by stories where they felt seen. I don't remember what I read a month ago, but I do remember the stories I read as a child. Books have a huge impact on children. And picture books are often an introduction to children's experience of the world for the first time. So they're so important. Children raised on books that represent every voice, every culture, every experience will have more empathy for others. And a child who sees themselves in books will feel their story matters. And I speak from personal experience. Growing up in the UK in the 60s and 70s, and being the only South Asian in my class, the only Muslim, the only brown child, I did not think my voice mattered because I didn't see myself or my experience mirrored in books or anywhere. So today, when I come across a picture book that is representative of my identity or experience, I get really emotional. I'm so happy for the child who gets to read this story and to see themselves in these stories. And at the same time, I think how amazing it would have been had I had these books while I was growing up. Being an immigrant, and the thing is, our family, 3 generations of our family have been immigrants. So I wanted to use this analogy, just like a repotted plant. A repotted plant needs strong roots to thrive. And immigrant children need to see stories of their heritage to strengthen their sense of identity. And knowing their culture and traditions empowers them and connects them to their history and their roots. And that's so important. The Moon from Dehradun was inspired by my grandparents' experience and also my mother and her 4 siblings. Growing up, I heard my mother's account of her harrowing experience of partition. As an adult, I also heard the accounts of my uncle, Mamu Aziz, and my aunt, Khala Nasreen. My mother's youngest brother, Mamu Said, was just a baby at the time, so he has no recollection. And I never got to hear the account of my youngest aunt, Khala Azra. So I chose to use her name for my protagonist, and with permission of her children, of course. Writing this book was really challenging because in order to write a picture book and of such a traumatic moment in history, it was really challenging to make it accessible to young children while not losing the importance of that moment in time. And so I had to, I chose to do it from the perspective of a child. And I think it works because of that. But I also wanted to share something that I used. There's one line in the book, which I will share. In fact, I'll hold it up because I don't have a PowerPoint. There's one line that says, "My heart sinks like a stone in a well." And the reason I chose that line was when I heard the stories of partition, I heard that there were many girls and women who either jumped into wells or were thrown in wells. And I couldn't share that in my story, obviously, but I wanted to honor those lives that were lost. And there was another part in it that I wanted to honor my grandmother she actually had, there's a part in the story where Azra's mother takes her rihel. I have one with me. So a rihel is a book stand carved out of one piece of wood, and people, well, my grandmother used it to read the Quran on it, and she carried it with her to Pakistan, and then my mother carried it with her to the UK when she emigrated, and now it's in Canada. So this piece of history has been in our family for, I think, 86 years. And I also wanted to share, there's a word in Urdu and Hindi, it's amanat, and I'll try and translate it. It means something precious that has been entrusted to our care, something that doesn't necessarily belong to us. So I think stories are an amanat. We are holding them for future generations. And if we fail to pass down these stories, we are robbing our children of their history. In school visits, I urge students to ask their parents and grandparents about their childhood, their daily lives. These are treasures to be gathered, and they are necessary for our world. If children have stories that empower them, they will change the world for the better. For stories connect us to our humanity. They stay with us. They have a visceral impact. They show us that we are part of a bigger picture that began before our existence and will continue after we are gone. And, you know, I hold on to that hope. I hope that today's children will grow up more empathetic, and they will be the leaders of tomorrow. And it's my hope that they will have empathy and they will achieve world peace. And in today's world, especially in the heartbreaking situation, that is what I hold on to, that stories will make a difference and impact the future. And I thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Shireen. I'll save my questions, but that was really beautifully said,
you.
and I appreciate you sharing that. Tarun.
Yeah, Shireen, that was beautiful. Really wonderful to hear your thoughts and your story. Just gonna start this keynote. So like Shireen said, there's such a wonderful real story at the heart of this. And when I was approached about this project to illustrate, I was immediately struck by the subject of the partition, the way it was handled, like Shireen said, telling it from a child's perspective was a really powerful way to talk about this difficult period of history. I myself am from India, and I believe Shireen is from Pakistan, so I felt it was quite poetic, actually, that a Pakistani writer and an Indian illustrator could come together and make a book about the partition. And I just thought, you know, I should really do this. I'd never illustrated a book before, but I was so honored that you know, this was the first book I got to illustrate. So it was really powerful for me. I learned a lot about the partition myself, researching while working on this book. Shireen was kind enough to share a lot of her family's pictures and memories with me. These are some images she had shared with me early on in the process before I'd drawn anything, and it really struck me that, wow, these were real people who went through this story, and it completely changed their lives, you know. And there's so many more people who who went through this. So just seeing these memories stored made it very visceral, trying to bring this book to life. Along with that, I'd done a lot of research, looking at pictures and movies and reading books about the partition, and you can see the just seeing the faces of the people who went through this at the time. These were pictures taken during the partition, and seeing mothers and children especially having to leave their homes, and especially because we're following a little girl in the story. It it just made it a very, very sensitive topic to handle. So a lot of this research was um, really important to do. Uh, looking at these pictures of people on the trains trying to leave from India to go to Pakistan, or from Pakistan to go to India. Like it's really crazy to see um, what really happened, and trying to bring that to life in a kid-friendly way, but also not hide away from the fact that this is what really happened, was uh, a challenge that we had to take on. Along with that, there's the research of actually looking at architecture and things of that period, kitchen utensils, what houses would look like, what would the kitchen look like, doorways. The doorways ended up being quite important in the visual storytelling of this book. So doing a lot of research on the design of how those things looked, and trying to capture that um, honest feeling there. And of course, this story also deals with a doll. So looking into what kind of dolls were made back then, and what kids played with back then. And so when I started the project, finally, after doing a lot of research, I landed with this design of the main family, and Shireen's pictures were um, instrumental in me trying to arrive to what the characters were going to look like. You can tell even the father is actually quite similar to the father in the pictures there. With his glasses and his beard pattern. I asked Shireen early on if there were any particular quirks or personalities that I could try and bring into the story from her experience. So trying to do a lot of that work ahead of time. And then I thought it'd be cool to maybe show a little bit of how rough the process of this book was. I kind of started before making any pretty imagery, just trying to thumbnail out the whole book in like really tiny, rough sketches. That this hasn't been seen by anyone, not even our editor or art director, who are instrumental in making this book look as good as it is. This is me just trying to work through, what were the story beats we want to communicate in each spread, and I'm trying to describe little things like, Azra should feel fearful in this panel, and would the compositional elements of, I want to see a bed here, and Azra and her brother lifting him up, and how do I play with that, but also make sure the reader is able to flow through from one page to the next. So I'd kind of done this for the whole book, and as you can see, it's really, really rough and not pretty at all. But these were some of the core ideas that I was trying to figure out at the time. And a lot of it actually did end up staying. You can kind of see the resemblance to the final version of the book. Once I'd done that, I would kind of do a full-blown rough that looked something like this, where I would actually kind of draw out exactly the size of the characters and what the house would look like. Doing a lot of research about the houses came into play here. You know, it needed to feel cozy, but old, and it had to feel like it was in the family for several generations. So it needed to be recognizable as a house from Dehradun also. So trying to think about all that in fleshing this story to life. And then we come to this cleaned up image where I go in and detail out the line work and get some color in there. And I personally learned a lot about illustrating images through the process of this book. Here's another example of a panel that started out as a thumbnail that went into a rough, that once I sent it to the editors and the art directors on the publishing side, they had a few notes to tweak the image. So this is me trying to work through that feedback, and then once we felt like this was good to go, then actually trying to clean it up. And this is my line work pass, and then I get the color in, and this is what's in the final book. So there's a very clear progression of like a really rough sketch to the final fleshed out piece. This was probably the most difficult spread to do, and it was also the first spread that we tried to tackle, seeing the train station and people trying to board the train, but there was not enough space on the train like we saw in the pictures earlier. People didn't really get tickets. They just kind of had to find a way to escape, so they would climb up on the tops of trains, and it was not really regulated. This was kind of a desperate time, so trying to capture that feeling, and Azra's distraught by the fact that she's left her favorite doll behind. So trying to capture that feeling in the composition, in the image, and also for us as the audience to feel that come through. It kind of progressed into this version of the spread, and then after working through more notes and trying to figure out little stylistic things and the exact color palette and the exact design, as you might be able to see, the family's design is a little bit different here. Once I had figured all that out, then I went back in and fleshed it all out, added more people, because it needed to feel even more visceral. This piece took the longest because I really wanted to pay close attention to each and every person that you see in the spread. Like, all of them had their own separate journey during the partition. They had their own story. There were children who were separated from parents. There were couples separated from each other, and friends separated from one another. So trying to capture that feeling, I tried to make sure that every single person had a unique look to them and a unique pose and expression and design, and trying to make sure that it felt real. And yet, hopefully also charming enough to be in a picture book that's appropriate for kids. This is another example of a tough spread. Azra getting inside the train and witnessing the crowd of people who were crammed into the train. These were again real things that happened. So how would that have felt? Drawing each and every face here again was really emotional to do, because you as I go in and draw everyone's eyebrows, and the mother holding the child close, drawing those to life, it kind of, it just makes you aware of how those people would have really felt in that situation. Here's another example of a rough taken to final. And when the family finally enters Pakistan and they find their new home, they're witnessing the same thing that's happened to them, but to another family who's had to escape their home to travel to the other side. The religious tension of this time in partition kind of needed to be seen on the surface a little bit here and there. So adding details of a Hindu puja room to show that, oh, this was a Hindu family who faced a similar struggle, and seeing the food left partially cooked, while they had to pack up their things and hurry. This is the final. Here's another example. One of the things we wanted to highlight was this sibling relationship that was kind of at the heart of this story. Azra is not emotionally close to her brother at the start of the story, but through the course of this journey and the difficulty they face together, she learns to embrace him through this time, and trying to show in the story, among all the terrible macro world things that are happening, trying to show their relationship start to blossom, finding pockets of moments to show her hugging her brother, maybe for even the first time, and them discovering parts of their new house together as they start a new life. This was some exploration done for what the cover of the book might be. We went through several iterations, as you can see, trying to figure out how do we want to not only sell this book, but what is the core feeling you get out of the book when you see the first image on the cover in a bookstore, and trying to explore the moods there. And ultimately, because of the core sibling relationship, we landed on this image that felt really sweet, and it also involved the doll. And in the backdrop of all this, the train journey and the reality of scores of people during partition. And this was the final in color. I kind of tried to go with a muted color palette that felt invoking of the time, didn't disrespect the horror of the situation, but also feel palatable to a younger audience that would feel inviting to read. So it felt like a limited, muted color palette felt like the way to go, and just trying to make it feel more emotional rather than realistic and overly colorful, maybe, as maybe a book of another subject matter might handle. Our ending for the book was quite a tricky one. We wanted this other family to discover Azra's old doll as Azra discovers a doll left behind in her new home by another person. We were trying to figure out how are these two girls connected? Are they connected through the country that they're being separated from? Are they being connected by this abstract idea of the land they're connected by? Is it not about any of that? Is it just about them and their dolls? Ultimately, we landed with this idea of uh, them in their entryways, starting a new life in their homes with the sun rising up on it, and it's the beginning of their new era, and we were able to show their mirroring um, experiences through this journey, and almost a one for one swap of, you know, they're going into each other's homes and discovering the other's doll, trying to mirror that experience as much as possible, uh, to show that, oh, there were many families that might have gone through this. When it came to the glossary page and the map, uh, drawing the map was quite emotional for me, to be honest, because it was the first time I'd actually drawn uh, what my country used to be, and actually drawing the line that divided the countries, and um, just on an abstract level from 30,000 feet up in the air, drawing that line kind of made it very real, and made me think about uh, the exact separation of the families that happen across those borders. I feel extremely fortunate to have worked on this book, and feel privileged to bring the story of this family to life. And I thank Sharon for the wonderful story and the opportunity. Our publisher at Simon & Schuster, our editor, Eliza Liu, and our art director, Michael McCartney, who had initially reached out to me for this. And I want to thank Essie and Andrea for having us here, and for this wonderful award. It really means a lot. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Taro, and thank you, Shireen, so much for sharing all of this. I'll admit, I'm feeling kind of emotional with the content you just shared, and it's incredibly moving. And my first question for you, maybe starting with Tarun, is how did you, I mean, I think you kind of answered that first question, which is, was it an emotional experience? And I think the answer to that is yes, but how did you go about sort of maintaining your own well-being as you were going through the creation process?
I guess I didn't think about that too much. I was just sunken in on learning as much as I could about what had happened, and reading people's stories, and movies and articles from that period, because it's something that I was partially exposed to when I was younger, but as an adult, it kind of hits me in a different way, really thinking about what our ancestors have gone through. Um, yeah, so I guess I didn't. I was just more sunken into that world for a while.
That's very fair. How about you, Shireen?
Watching Tarun's presentation made me so emotional. I mean, it's really powerful. The illustrations, and then hearing about the journey as well. And seeing those different covers. I had never seen those before. So it was really, really interesting to see that, how you chose, which one to use. But I really appreciate you sharing all that. It really means a lot.
Yeah, no, thank you. I mean, it was it was a wonderful learning opportunity for me, and to bring this world to bring this book into the world. Didn't take it lightly.
For me, writing it was very emotional too. I mean, I would put it away for a while, sometimes for years. I started it a long time ago, but it felt so heavy. I would have to take breaks from it. And I think, one day I just thought, I don't know how much time I have. I need to get this story out because our children need to know their history. So that was when it became urgent.
I think it's a testament to your writing, sorry, that with such a difficult subject matter that you could still bring this sense of warmth and hopefulness in especially the ending of the story, and really make it accessible for younger readers without making it too scary, but still respecting what the times might have felt like. Yeah, it was powerful stuff.
Thank you. But I really, oh, sorry. No, I that was so important to me because we have to have hope. And I wanted to end on a note of hope, and that's why I write children's books, because adult books don't always have that. And and children give me hope. So yes, of course.
Well, I'm very grateful for both of you, and I'm sure so is everyone else who's listening in right now. I'll do my best to go through the many questions we have in the chat, as well as the wonderful compliments you both got. Dan O'Neill says, so beautiful, Shireen. And Susan Johnson Taylor is asking, I'd love to know how Shireen's text evolved from first draft to final publication. What, if anything, changed the most?
Well, that's a great question, Susan. Thank you. I know the basic story didn't change, although in the original version, there was no baby brother. Now, can you imagine that without the baby brother? So that's a big change. And there was a refrain that kind of made it too simplistic. There was a refrain on every spread in the original draft. So that went. But yes, the story really did stay the same. The journey, the train journey from Dehradun to Lahore, that was there always because that was my mother's story that I wanted to convey. But small details did change.
Excellent. Abra says, what an incredible amount of research went into this. What was the most challenging aspect of the story to capture?
When going into the research, it was so hard because of the pain that you feel reading stories and going deeper into it. I think the research was very hard because, I had my mother's story, but I needed to know more details in order to, make it a stronger story. Even though you don't add all those details, you have to know them. And so I think going into the research was very painful. I hope that answers your question.
I think so, yeah. I have a question for Taran here. What were your motivations for choosing this color palette? It captures so much emotion in so few colors.
To be honest, I struggled with the color. I struggle in general with color myself, but I think trying to strip it down to a few colors and keeping it muted just felt like I was respecting the time more and the grit of it more. I think it would have felt odd to make it really colorful, or go the other way of like completely black and white. I think we would lose that sense of hope, and black and white would also kind of, in a way, distance you from the story in a weird way. Like oh, that happened in a totally different time that doesn't concern me. But yeah, overly the tone of this story didn't feel like it was really colorful, but there were pockets of color here and there, like the relationship of uh, Azra and her brother, and the hope she begins to find at the end. Um, yeah, I beyond that, I don't know, because there was a lot of trial and error and doing one pass and then kind of stepping back and reacting to it and feeling like I want to desaturate this more or saturate it more or add, you know, a couple more sprinkles of color. It was a really uh, trial and um, trial and error basis. But yeah, it just needed to feel emotionally true for the story. That's what was important for me.
I think the color palette has definitely resonated with the readers. I have
Thank
a
you.
question here for Shireen. Can you tell us why you had to write the specific story and what inspired this narrative?
Oh, I knew I had to write this story. I had heard my mother's account. Even as a child, I remember she told it, many times. And when I did become a writer, I knew that this was a story I had to write because it's my family's history and my children need to know it. Originally, that was the reason. But then when I learned from fellow writers, they didn't know what the partition was. And I realized that, how it's all about whose narrative is heard, and I realized that this is a narrative that is not well known, even though it's the world's largest forced migration. 15 million people, they became displaced overnight, and knowing that even my friends hadn't heard of it, I thought this is a book that is needed in the world. It's not just for my children, it's for everyone.
Thank you. I have a question from Sonia. Were there any particular sources, i.e. books, articles, etc., that stood out to Shireen and Tomarine while researching the partition? Great question.
That's a great question, Sonia. I know that the one book I used from the start was Yasmin Khan's The Great Partition, but I did also watch documentaries because around the 70th anniversary of partition, there were many documentaries, especially in England. When I visited, my brother had saved some. I'd watched those. I read some fictional stories, but there are not many. Maybe 2 middle grade novels and 1 picture book, and that's about it, really. I had a whole pile. I just can't remember the names. But yeah, it was a lot of research.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
I'm sorry. I think for me it was a lot of the old photos from back when it was really happening that really helped me. Any documentaries I found, there was a book, Train to Pakistan by Kushwant Singh, that was really helpful. It's a fictional tale, but very rooted in reality, and it had a lot of aspects of this story. Literally having a train that goes to Pakistan, and there were also a couple of movies. 1947 Earth, which was made in 1990 something. I think it's Deepa Mehta who directed it. That really helped in terms of visual storytelling and the kind of color palette that you could evoke, and someone else's interpretation of that time to see, oh, how can I think about it too. And probably I think there was another one. Sardar Udham was a good one to watch too, specifically around the Punjab region. But yeah, I think a variety of sources, and there were other non-fictional books specifically about the partition that helped.
Thank you. I wrote a few of those down so that I can share them out in the post-event email. I can capture everything, but I did my best. We have so many great comments and questions. I'll try and get through several of them. So Megan says, your book is one of my most treasured possessions, and I'm honored to accompany you on your writing journey and call you a friend, Shireen. Have you heard from children, teachers, and parents that they have been impacted by the book? How have they been using it in schools? I hope so.
I haven't heard anyone really. I haven't done so many school visits since the book came out. That's a good question. I would love to have more school visits and really bring this to more schools. The few visits I've had, one was like a family night, so there were high school students, and there was one high school student from South America, an immigrant, and he said that the story really resonated with him as someone who had recently migrated, and it really it struck him. So that's a great question. I don't really have much of an answer. I hope it will be used in classrooms and everywhere.
I can imagine that kids having to go through some bad experiences around the world around forced migration would really relate to this book, even with the different setting. And unfortunately, there are a lot of kids out there who can relate to that. So,
yes,
yeah.
Unfortunately, yes.
Yeah. So I'll see if I can get through some of the lovely comments we've gotten from Hardashan. We grew up in India reading heart-wrenching stories of migration from Pakistan to India, but knew very little about migration from India to Pakistan. Thank you very much for taking us on the journey from Dehradun under the illumination of the ever-present moon. So that's very sweet. Thank you both for adding. Go ahead.
I just wanted to say something. A friend of mine, also a writer, she told me that her family left Lahore during partition, and that really struck a chord with me, because my family moved to Lahore, and here her family left. So that was very poignant and moving.
Yeah. We have Sandra saying, thank you both for adding new layers for me to appreciate and share each time I revisit your book. I can second that.
Yeah.
And then Barbara said, not a question, but a comment. Fascinating to see the process of developing illustrations which capture the emotions and enhance the themes which underlie Shireen's moving story of the partition and the people who lived through it. This is a story that children have not likely had the opportunity to contemplate and grow their understanding of lives unlike their own. I second that. Srividya says, Venkat says, the partition was a heart-rending event in the history of India and Pakistan. Shireen, this being a story so close to you and your family, how was your journey as you went about writing this book?
Well, thank you, Srividya, and I appreciate that question. It was a difficult journey because again, it was so close to my family. And my mother, when she told me this story, we were both in tears. I mean, the last time I heard it from her, because I wanted to know more details, it was very difficult. But I knew I had to write it, and I knew I had to get through that difficulty. I just took breaks and did a lot of self-care, and with the help of all my critique partners, and we got through it.
Thank you. We have a comment here from Sarah. At least a third of my students were refugees from different Asian and African countries. They rarely share their stories with peers. Listening to the two of you share how even now you feel the pain from your own experiences, it makes me wonder what they are really going through today, even though they are safer than they were and are able to eat every day. You two give me hope for my students that they will find their voice and tell their story when they are ready. I will share this book with them. My students are not from Pakistan, but from the images you share, they will relate to your story. Thank you so much, Sarah, for sharing that.
Thank you. That's so meaningful, because I do think that this can resonate with anyone who is an immigrant or who has been displaced. And unfortunately, in this world, it's an ongoing thing, and sadly.
Yeah. Srividi also said, "Congratulations, Shireen and Tarun. Your book is a beautiful amant, and that you've handed to this world. I hope I pronounced that right.
Amanat. Thank you, Srividya.
Thank you.
Another one, heartfelt congrats on this award. This is such a thoughtfully told, vital, and important story, and continues to be relevant."
Thank you.
So we're swarmed with lovely, lovely comments like this. So we have still at least 8 minutes left. So if anyone has any burning questions or eager to ask Tarun and Shireen, I encourage you to add that to the chat. And I'll see what other questions I maybe had for you. Oh, so I do have a question. I'm obviously an outsider. I'm not of the South Asian diaspora or community in any way. And I'm curious, the partition itself, is it something you have to be careful bringing up? Is it something that is triggering to people in your families and your communities? Sort of, how does a mention of it, is it a taboo subject? Is it something that's discussed frequently? I'd love to learn more about what it feels like to be in the room, I guess, when this topic is brought up.
I think 76 years on, people are talking about it. But I think a whole generation, or most of a whole generation, took their stories with them to the grave, because I don't think there are many stories that have been told. And I spoke to a friend a family friend, who said that they wish they had asked their parents about partition, and they never mentioned it. And I think the reason they never mentioned it was because it was too painful. And I think that trauma, a lot of people take that trauma with them to the grave, because they don't want to burden their children. Because once you know something, you can't unknow it. And so if it's so painful, perhaps they didn't want to share that. And that's sad.
It is. And I hope you get to spread your message with teachers and their students in particular, so that they feel encouraged to share their story. But Tara, it looks like you were ready to say something as well.
No, I don't have much to add. I think I just echo Shireen's comment. I think it doesn't get brought up a lot, but when it does, it always feels like a heavy subject with trauma attached to it and mixed feelings, depending on who you ask, I guess. So it's always a difficult subject from a variety of angles, I think. But I think the more we keep sharing stories about it, I think maybe the easier it might be to process what happened.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I'd like to add, I think because there are different narratives, and people can't agree on those narratives. And so that's why it can be tricky to bring it up and discuss it. But that was one reason why I ended the story. And Tarun has very beautifully illustrated it, I think. The last picture of the two girls, they look the same, and yet their families were torn apart. Their homes, they had to leave their homes. And the thought that I had was, they dress the same, they eat the same food, they speak the same language. What was it that tore them apart? And that's something that is very sad. And I hope that people can heal and the divides can be breached. And I hope it can build bridges.
Absolutely. We still have time for a few more questions here. So we have one from Megan. What is next for both of you? Are you working on anything right now? Do you have something coming up?
Well, I have a book on submission, and I'm just hoping, and that's also was a very painful story. But I guess a lot of my books tend to be about belonging and displacement, and it just happens. Maybe it's because I've always been searching for my place in the world. Maybe that's where it comes from. But I can't share because it's still out on submission.
Well, please let us know when
you.
it's time to share, because I know I'm at least personally very interested in reading it.
Thank you.
For me, I'm not currently illustrating a picture book at the moment. Hopefully in the future sometime. I'm in an early stage of trying to develop a graphic novel. And I'm also a professional feature film animator, so most of my time goes into my day job doing that. So currently working on a movie that's due out in the summer, so that's my main focus at the moment. And yeah,
but still
I
hoping
would love to
work on
see
books.
the graphic novel. I would love to read that.
yeah, I hope so. It'll probably be a while before it is out in the world, but hopefully
Keep us
one day.
posted.
Yeah.
So I'll read just the last few beautiful comments we got from the audience. Shruti says, thanks for this beautiful book, Shirin and Tarun. I also love the cadence of the title, and also the fact that a PB title has the name of an Indian city in it. I'm not sure what PB stands for, but agreed.
Picture book.
Ah, yes. Barbara says, Shirin's remark echoes that of Holocaust survivors as well, and that it took many decades for the stories to come out. In the same way, stories of partition are precious and important. I was thinking the same thing, actually, including with some of the imagery in the book. So that's interesting. Comment from Zainab, Shirin, the book is beautiful. It touched my heart and made me cry. This is a reminder of the South Asian history that needs to be told. So honored to be your friend. Tarun, the art evokes feelings of warmth and hope. The picture that touched me the most is when Azra went to her new home. That happened to my aunt when she fled India down to the pot left cooking in an empty house. Yeah. I hope this book becomes available to all South Asians in India and Pakistan. Laura says,
thank you.
Yeah. Laura says, this is such a beautiful book, and thank you both for bringing this story to life. Shirin, I'm curious to know your family's reaction to seeing the book for the first time. And it's 6 o'clock right now, but we'll let you answer that question and then we'll say goodbye.
Well, for me, the most important thing was handing it to my mother and seeing her read the dedication, which is to her. And yes, they all appreciated it. And it was a wonderful experience. And thank you for everything.
It is well deserved. Thank you both so much for joining us today. I found this time very moving, and I think everyone else did as well. And I appreciate everyone's comments. Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you all.
Thank you all.